Hey, it's Webs here with balancing changes for Hearthstone, Standard, and Wild. We knew these were actually going to be coming because they got leaked out a little bit early, or at least some of them did. So let's look at what some of the changes have been done to Standard Hearthstone. Alright, so the first change that we're seeing is to Celestial Alignment, where it will no longer reset both players' mana to 0. It will only affect the player actually casting it. This is probably a good overall change. It does make for some very frustrating games when your opponent plays this and it interrupts your key combo or key other thing that you actually want to do, and gives Druid a real easy access to actually just reset their own mana way quicker than you could even get the mana back anyways as a non-Druid player. Well, personally, this probably wouldn't have been the change that I actually would have went with for Druid, just because of the fact that Guff is a much more frustrating card to play against, and honestly, the fact that Druid can actually get to 20 mana means that Celestial Alignment actually being changed to only affect them isn't going to change much in my opinion. It actually gives it a lot worse matchups against decks that it had really good matchups, such as Boar Priest and some other decks that needed a key combo done on X turn, and that is probably going to hurt the deck a little bit, but people might just end up cutting Celestial Alignment out of the deck, and I'm pretty sure Ramp Druid without Celestial Alignment is still perfectly fine. And this is the only change that we're actually getting for Druid. So the next change we're seeing is the fact that Stag Spirit Wildseed is now only going to equip a 3/2 weapon instead of 4/2 weapon. This is a decent enough balance change. I don't think this was really necessary. I guess you can high roll with the weapon pretty early on, and that's probably why they ended up wanting to change this up. And I do agree with their statement here where they said they don't want it to fit in every single hunter deck like it was currently fitting. They want to have it as its own thing while also having other type of hunter decks around, so you can actually have some variety. And that's something I completely agree with, and if this makes this happen, then this is a pretty good change. Snowfall Guardian is the next card being changed. Now he will no longer scale with every single frozen minion, and he will be a 5/5 baseline. This was one of the changes that was actually leaked out last week, and the reason why I built the Evolve Shaman deck the way I did. I knew this card was going to get changed. It is one of the cards that feels the worst to actually play against. I hate playing against this in any type of board-based matchup where your opponent just freezes out your board for 2 or 3 turns and then slams down a really big minion, or just slams your face with the Snowfall Guardians and other things that actually copy the Snowfall Guardian. Snowfall Guardian by itself, I don't think would have ever been really an issue. The problem is Shaman has so much access to other types of battlecry duplication that a card like this is just really problematic for the metagame, and honestly is a pretty good change. And if you are looking for a new Shaman deck to try out, I'll leave a card up above me right now for the Evolve Shaman deck and a link to it down below. Now, for the next card that's getting changed, Vial Library is no longer going to have a base buff of +1/+1. Instead, you aren't going to get that. You're just going to get +1/+1 for each imp that you actually can control. I don't think this will be a big enough change to kill Imp Warlock, which is a little bit frustrating to say, just because this is one of the decks that I hate the most currently in the metagame. I know the counter to a card like this is to use something like Suffocating Starfish to just silence the entire opponent's board. However, we are also seeing a nerf to one of the worst matchups Imp Warlock had, which was Control Shaman. And honestly, if Control Shaman actually fades out of existence, then this might be even more problematic now than it already is, even though Imp Warlock is already a strong deck. But hopefully some of the later changes that I've seen for Warrior, for example, will actually try to keep Imp Warlock in place. Now for the next card that got changed, this one is mainly for Wild. Cobalt Illusionist is being changed to 5 mana instead of 4. This is to make it impossible to get off of sketchy information. Really good change for Wild. I don't really play it. I know there was a lot of weird memey things with Neptulon and some other high cost cards, and I tried to recreate the deck in Standard. It didn't do so well, but at the same time, it is still a really powerful deck and probably was devastating the Wild metagame, so I guess this is probably a pretty good change. Now for the next card, which is the first buff, this is a perfect buff for Relic Demon Hunter. The location is now going to cost 2 instead of 3. I don't know why this card never cost 2 before. It should have cost 2 from the beginning, and it's really just such a strange choice to make it cost 3 when Vial Library was so much better than this. I guess this has a lot of potential to scale up really, really quickly, but at the same time, it does help with the curve for Relic Demon Hunter, which was one of the main issues. If you want to play a Relic Demon Hunter deck, I'll leave a link to my video down below and in a card up above if I figure out how to do that. The next card being changed is Relic of Extinction, which is lowering its cost to 1, which is a good change. I honestly probably would have preferred if it started at 2 damage to a random enemy and still cost 2, but it is what it is. I guess they just didn't want to have 4 free damage to your opponent's board, and this is probably a safer balance and change overall for Relic Demon Hunter. Again, this does help with the curve really well, though, just because of the fact that you now have something to do on turn 1 as Relic Demon Hunter that isn't just your hero power. And honestly, I can't wait to see if Relic Demon Hunter becomes a really competitive deck. It still is missing a huge payoff, which is what the deck really needs, but this is a good step forward. Now for the next card that got changed, it is Bibliomite, which is gaining a 1 more attack. Good for Aggro Demon Hunter, not really a deck that I'm really looking too much forward to actually playing. I do like the idea of shuffling cards in your hand back into your deck, and I kind of hope we see some more support for a card like this in the future. But if you can tell, I'm not really a big aggro player. I have the mindset of always trying to clear the board, and aggro just has a big disconnect with me most of the time. Now for the next card, which is Magnifying Glass, which is gaining another attack too. This is a pretty good change overall, as this could be just used in a shuffle your hand back into the deck, Aggro Demon Hunter, similar to the previous card. I don't know if this will change much. I don't think this is a big enough change for this to feel really oppressive, where you are going to be really frustrated to go against Demon Hunter where they keep drawing 3 additional cards. If they added extra durability, then that might have actually been a problem, but as it currently stands, this just makes Aggro Demon Hunter a little bit more face damage than they already can. Now for the next card, Abyssal Depths, which is getting its cost lowered to 3. I love this change. It makes it so much better for a Vander Demon Hunter deck, which was the variant of Relic Demon Hunter that I actually put out. This allows you to curve directly into Vander, and thus making Vander Demon Hunter decks probably a lot more relevant than they currently are. And honestly, I really love this change. There might be some other decks that can actually abuse this card as much too, such as Questline Demon Hunter, as we will be seeing another change to a card later that will help that deck out a little bit. But as it currently stands, I love this change. Can't wait to see the weird wild decks people come up with. The next card being changed is Battleworn Vanguard, which is gaining an additional HP back to where it originally was. Probably wasn't really needed too much, but decks do have a lot more access to early game removal tools than they did when this card originally came out, and this probably will make this card a lot better. It already sees a lot of play in Aggro Demon Hunter, and I don't think this will make it any less likely to see play. It'll probably increase its playability in other decks besides just Aggro Demon Hunter. Maybe Token Demon Hunter will become a deck again too. You never know with a card like this. It might be a little bit frustrating in some cases just because you can't hero power and kill it if you're in a mirror match, but there are other cards that you can use to remove it, such as the Relic of Extinction or some other cards that have been printed since then for other classes. Now for the final Demon Hunter card, Ironbound Brute is going to be getting its cost lowered to 7, where it was originally. Probably a decent enough change. We don't have Glide and other things to duplicate this card anymore, so it's not as impactful as it used to be in Questline Demon Hunter, which I think was the main worry. So a card like this is probably going to be very healthy for the game if Questline Demon Hunter becomes a more relevant deck, and should help try to push that deck. It's a deck that I have a real soft spot for because it was actually, I think, the first or the second video I ever put out on this channel. It was a really bad deck, but I still really like the idea of drawing through your entire deck and discounting it across the way. Now, for Paladin, Legendary Invitation off of the Countess is now going to cost 2 instead of 3. I saw a lot of people actually suggesting this when Blizzard did announce that we're going to be balancing changes for Paladin, and honestly, this is probably a decent enough change. I don't know if this will make Pure Paladin even stronger. It technically does, but Pure Paladin right now I don't think is a really good deck, and I don't think this is enough to push the deck forward. There are definitely some high rolls you can get off of this, but at the same time, I don't know if those high rolls are worth not being able to run a Bran and Sire combination if you are going down like a Questline Paladin route or something else that generates a bunch of minions. All right, now for the next card. Stand Against the Darkness is being lowered to a 4-cost card. Probably pretty decent for Questline Paladin, as mentioned before. I do think this card is pretty decent for that deck. It's just the fact that for some weird reason that questline just doesn't seem to like to do anything when it comes to the metagame. It's a real fun deck to try to play around with because it's like a zoo style paladin deck, and there are a bunch of support cards, and honestly this is a really big payoff that you could actually have for a deck like that, and probably we'll see more play if we do see Questline Paladin become even more popular. The next card being changed is Warhorse Trainer, which is going to make it where your Silver Hand recruits have +2 attack and taunt. The +2 attack is actually pretty good for a aggro-based questline deck. The taunt is alright because it does protect your own face, and it also does protect the Warhorse Trainers. So this might actually see some play now that both of these changes are actually going through, and it allows your questline reward to actually scale up even quicker because this is just an aura effect, and as long as your opponent doesn't have an easy way to actually deal with a 3-4 and all the taunts that you're actually putting in your way then this card is probably pretty decent overall. Promotion is also being changed to give taunt, which isn't really necessary but is a decent enough change. Again, Questline Paladin might actually be more meta relevant now that we've seen a bunch of changes to the Silver Hand recruit cards, and this is actually just a pretty good card for that deck anyways because it's a 1-cost card that allows you to progress your questline pretty easily. And now for Rogue. The first card is going to be a big one and something that a lot of people are going to be frustrated at. Edwin Defies Kingpin is going to be reduced to a 3-cost minion with 3 attack, 3 HP. I know during this weekend there was a Hearthstone tournament, and during this tournament, Rogue was actually a really relevant deck. However, I don't really pay too much attention to Hearthstone esports. I probably should, but honestly, this is a change that makes me worried because it was already a decent enough card, and you can now combo this and Mr. Smite in the exact same turn if you really feel like it. Again, like you used to be able to, which could be very devastating. Honestly, this is probably one of the weirdest changes that I've seen out of all of these. I don't think Edwin needed to be buffed up, and there's just other raw power engines that you could have actually buffed up in Rogue to make them a lot better, like the one that they did next, which is reducing the cost of Sprint to 5. Decent enough change to the card. However, I don't think this will matter too much. If you are going to run this, you're probably also running these Swift Scale Nagas, which allow you to discount this to 0, so a change like this doesn't do too much. I do think this makes it overall better for the game than a change to Edwin, but at the same time, I don't know if people are going to start to run Sprint if they're not playing a Reno Rogue deck. The next card being changed is Silverleaf Poison, which is going to be reduced to a 1-cost spell. Really good change for Weapon Rogue, a deck that I really do like. I had a lot of success with it in Sunken City. As it turns out, it's actually a pretty powerful deck overall that a lot of people aren't really expecting, and honestly one of the better cards that you could just shove into a rogue deck, given the fact that if you're running any type of weapon support, you can easily just get additional card draw each individual turn, and the fact that this is a nature spell and Rogue doesn't really have access to too many different schools of spells, making multicaster a lot better. Now, Holocrus is also being changed to have stealth on him. I know a lot of people suggested him having rush, just so you could rush him into one of your opponent's minions before they trigger one of your battle cries, but I do think this is probably a decent enough change. I would have actually preferred the Rush 2, mainly due to the fact that even with stealth, sure, he's going to be harder to actually remove, but if you have no way to actually kill him while you actually have a secret on board, then this makes it a lot worse. However, you could delay playing down a secret for an additional turn while you just sit on him with stealth for a turn, if people aren't going to start to run a bunch of silences, which they could actually do. Honestly, this comment about rogues' draw power and what their strengths historically have been is probably pretty accurate. I do think the Edwin change is probably going to be a huge mistake, but it is what it is. It might be changed for the future. And honestly, out of all these changes so far, I think this one would have been probably the most likely to be reverted really quickly. Now for Warrior, Sanguine Depths is going to increase the attack by 2 instead of 1. Good change for Enraged Warrior, since that is really just an aggro-based warrior deck, and this does support a deck like that. This might actually see some play now in Questline Warrior or Pirate Warrior, whatever you actually want to call it, just so you can actually get some additional damage on your opponent's face, or any other aggro-based decks that Warrior might actually currently have access to. The next card being changed is Infuse X, which is going to be giving +1/+2 on its base effect, and then +2/+2. Good change for, again, Enraged Warrior. But the bigger change for this card is the fact that it's going to be Infuse 2 instead of 3, making it much easier to actually get the infused buff on it, thus allowing you to have an easier time to scale up your minions on board, and I think this will actually make the deck a lot more playable. Cruel Taskmaster is getting an additional 1 HP. I think this is a pretty decent change to keep it up with some of the other 2-drop cards that currently exist in Hearthstone, since this is a really old Hearthstone card that's just remained in standard. It's actually a classical card. I forgot about that. Changes like this is necessary to keep a card like this playable over the history of the game. I don't know if this will see too much play just because it is only 1 damage to 1 minion, as you would in theory rather do 1 damage to all your minions in a Enraged Warrior deck, but this is good enough to drop minion now to probably see a little bit of play. Now for some other warrior cards, getting a reversion to Tidal Revenant, which is now going to gain 8 armor again and do 5 damage like it used to. Good change. I really wanted to try out Elemental Warrior before this actually got nerfed the first time around, but I got too behind on what I actually wanted to do, and I didn't actually get around to making the deck profile back then. But because this change is going through, maybe I'll revisit it, especially with Bran and a bunch of other new Battlecry synergies that make this card a lot more fun to actually play. Shield Shatter is now going to deal 5 damage again. Really good change. Helps Control Warrior so much. In theory, this could push it forward to actually be the replacement for Control Shaman when it comes to keeping up with some of the aggro-based decks. Though at the same time, I don't know how necessary this is going to be, because a lot of the minions that are currently in the metagame have a lower amount of HP pools that are for aggro-based decks, and this just puts an additional 1 damage that will most of the time be overkill. I do think this is probably really good to see, because they did Control Warrior so dirty when they nerfed all these cards the first time around. And honestly, this might be another one that will maybe get reverted back pretty quickly, depending on how the meta actually ends up shaping up after all these changes. Slam is going to be reduced its cost by 1. And again, another classical card that has to current wave of cards in Hearthstone, and this is probably a pretty decent card overall now. Bash is also being changed to 2 mana. Again, another really old card that needed to be buffed up just so it could keep up with some of the newer cards that have been printed, and probably is a pretty good card now. I know I did use it a few times in some of my older Control Warrior decks. I also do kind of want to do a Spell Power Warrior deck where I try to OTK with Bash and some other cards, but I don't know how many copies of Bash that I can reasonably get in Warrior, and thus I don't know if this is going to be a reasonable combo, but I'm glad to see Control Warrior see some buffs to it, because it is a deck that needs to exist if they are going to promote a bunch of really big aggro decks. And the dev comment for warrior, or at least the control warrior aspects, is they were a little bit overzealous, which I completely agree with, to be honest. Hopefully this will allow some non-control warrior decks actually run some of these cards, such as Bash or Slam, as they're stating here, which could be really cool just to give some type of early game removal tool for any type of warriors deck instead of just control. Alright, so those were all the changes that were made today when it comes to standard Hearthstone. Let me know down below which ones you're looking most forward to use and what decks you're going to try out. I think I'm going to try out Secret Rogue maybe first, or even Enraged Warrior. I don't know which one it will be. Hopefully I'll be able to figure that out before tomorrow so I can actually have a video out by then. But like always, if you enjoyed the video, please do like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, bye bye.